talking with people about how to have a great retirement. This is the Rock Your Retirement Show. We don't talk about money, but we talk about almost everything else you need to rock your retirement. Now, here's your host, Kathe Kline.
Barbara and I have a special guest for you today, and her name is Becky Blue. Becky, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm excited to be here. And Barbara, it's great to meet both of you.
Well, I loved your book, but I thought because you and I have so much in common, I felt like I was looking in a mirror or listening in a mirror as I was reading. But I was hoping you could maybe just introduce yourself, tell us some things that you think we should know, and why you wrote the book. I know you started in the pandemic. I'd just love to hear that little backstory.
Sure. You know, as we all kind of identify to our careers, I will say that I have been a nurse my entire career, but I did retire formally in like 2017. And then 2020 pandemic year was the year I was, or 2019, I should say, I was going to be turning 60. And I had been a geriatric nurse, so I knew a lot about aging. I had a library full of aging books in my house. And I tend to be one of the younger ones of my friend group. And so they were starting to freak out that they had already turned they were going to be turning 60 first. And I thought, okay, I should be able to write some reflections, some essays, some thoughts about aging and what could be the possibilities for our third chapter in life. So I just kind of started writing, and that was when the pandemic hit. And so then I had a lot of time to write. All of a sudden I had 10 chapters, and I approached a publisher, and then I made it 20 chapters, and the book was born.
Well, I loved it. What I especially loved is in those first few chapters, you reflected on your childhood. And I felt like, this was my childhood. So we must be about the same age. I'm 66, and I started reading it on my birthday. And it was just like you'd sent me the book, and I started reading, and I went, oh, wow, this is just like resonating and connecting with me. But I just loved your reflections of your childhood. So maybe just talk a little bit about some of the things that you think about when you think of your childhood. I think a number of our listeners are going to go, oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, well, I think, we're very similar. I just had what I call my Medicare birthday, so I just turned 65. But as far as my childhood, I just feel like the 60s, even though it was a tumultuous, maybe worldwide, I think in general, it was kind of a charming time of the world here to grow up, and all the great music obviously happened when we were young, and in the 70s as well. So we kind of had that as a soundtrack backdrop to our life.
Well, Becky, I have to say that when you said that you had your Medicare birthday, you know what's here? You know what I'm hearing in the back of my mind? When
What's
you're
that?
64. Da, 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 da.
Exactly. I love that. It's a Beatles song, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
They always had the right words. Yeah. So I had a great childhood, grew up on a farm in the Midwest, but I had a lot of older adults around me. I had my grandparents, I had aunts and uncles and great uncles and great aunts. And so a lot of role models of aging that I write about in the book. And then, I had siblings, which I think are a great sort of relationships to really learn how to age and live in the world. I was the third of 4 children, so I kind of watched my older sisters and see what they did, and then I sometimes decided to do the opposite. I think being around all those older adults, I really came to like older people. And I'd love to just kind of sit, and I'd be the one kid that would want to stay in the kitchen longer than anybody else and listen to their story and their wisdom. And so I took that with me, I would say, into my nursing career. And that's kind of what led me to be in the geriatrics field.
Cool.
Wow. What does a geriatric nurse do?
Specifically, geriatrics, of course, is related to taking care of patients who are probably in that 65 and older age group. And for a lot of times, geriatrics has been seen even sort of older than that and focused on pathology and management of chronic illness. And maybe you're even thinking more of like patients who are in a long-term care center and frail. And I mean, this all kind of plays into our stereotype of people in their 80s and 90s. And so I did that, certainly. That was kind of my focus for many years. I actually was part of a geriatric assessment team at our local hospital where I had the pleasure of working with different therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, pharmacist, a geriatrician physician, and we would have a full day clinic, and it was just really wonderful. So, for example, maybe you would bring your mom into our clinic and say, we just don't know what to do with mom. Can she continue to live alone, or what is the best place for her? And so we would do a full day assessment, and working in that interdisciplinary team, I learned so much about the other aspects beyond nursing. I mean, typically nursing, you're looking at how do people respond to illnesses, but I ended up learning a lot about wellness as well, like from the physical therapist. What could this person maybe have done the last 10 or 20 years so that they wouldn't be in this situation that they're in now? And so that's what it kept coming through my mind is like, okay, what should I be doing now? As let's say I was maybe 40 at the time, what should I be doing now so that when I hit 60 or I hit 70, that I can do whatever I want to do? I just don't want to have my own bad choices impact what my future is going to be like.
That is such an amazing segue recording. Awesome. And that's a great segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about. Because again, I was reading this on my birthday, and I always set goals for myself every year. Kathe and I talked, I think, last time that I'm learning to play Mahjong, and it's hard. And I've never learned it before, but I'm enjoying it. But when you play with people that have been doing it for 16 years, they clobber you most of the time. And the other thing I've started new is yoga. And I've never done yoga, but just like you said, you want to be flexible, in your older age, make sure you can move and not have a fall. I think when you write a book, you want to inspire people, and you did. And what I'd like you to recant for the listeners is the road trip you took in New Zealand, and the story that you told, because I imagined it in my mind. It was so vivid, but I want to hear you tell it. And then I want to tell you what happened after I read that.
Well, that's wonderful. It's just a favorite memory. And you know how your photos kind of pop up now. And so I'm starting to hear or see photos from that trip, which I think was 5 years ago now. Yeah. So we were on a road trip in the South Island, and we were on kind of some curvy roads and ended up high above a beautiful vista in the mountains. And as we stood there at an overlook, we were with another couple, and we could see a biker, a bicyclist, a cyclist coming up that hill that we had just come up, which was enormous. And they had a orange flame vest on, and we kept watching and watching, and soon the cyclist came and parked right by us. And as this cyclist took the helmet off, here it revealed, I was expecting to see some 20-something boy, like my son's back home, healthy, but took the helmet off, and it was obvious it was female. She was female and was older than me. And so we said hello and introduced ourselves. And she was just so happy to be with us or to meet us. And she talked about that She, I think, was from England and was celebrating and honoring her 70th birthday by biking throughout the country of New Zealand. And that was kind of prior to me really kind of thinking about fantastic ways to really experience this third act of life. So that was the first time that I really met someone who is really thinking outside the box. And so, yeah, I'd be interested to see what you thought of that story.
Well, and I'm thinking now that we hadn't even talked about the name of your book, and it's called Turning: The Magic and Mystery of More Days. And if there was a theme that I discerned, it's that how many more days you have left. If you're in your 60s, you could have 10 years, 20 years, maybe even 30 years. How many of those could be good years? And so the whole book kind of just looks at that from different angles. I don't know if that's a great synopsis, but that's what I took away from it. But again, I'm reading it on my birthday. I read that and it was vivid. And I imagined, whatever, the New Zealand, and that she was going cross country. And I think a point you made was she was by herself.
Yes.
Right?
She was.
She wasn't with a group. No. Right? And she's 70 from England. Mm-hmm. So she's not near home. So we live in a 55 plus community, and I have a bike, but it's an e-bike, and we've ridden it some, but I didn't always make it. And they said, well, there's this thing called Reach the Beach. And I said, well, what's Reach the Beach? And it's American Lung Association fundraiser, but it's 100 miles. And my bike is electric and won't go 100 miles. So I came home. I said, honey, I signed up for Reach the Beach. He said, what? He goes, your bike won't go that far. I said, I know. I need a new bike. So after reading yours, and I thought, my whole life, I have sacrificed for my family, sacrificed for my children, giving them the very best. Whenever my husband wants something, he gets high end, right? It's just going to be great. I went and bought myself a bike.
Did you buy an expensive bike?
Oh, you bet I did. She is beautiful. You know what I'll do? I'll post on the Rocky Retirement. I'll get a picture. I got to get a cute outfit to go with her, but she is absolutely gorgeous. And I've had her for 2 days now. I just got back from the shop to do some minor adjustments. But my first day I rode 18 miles with hills. And yesterday I rode 30 miles with friends from the neighborhood. And I'm addicted. I love it. It's just like, oh my gosh, a really nice bike with good gears. But yes, it's ridiculously expensive. It's way more than my first car.
Let's compare and contrast. So on my end, when we moved here, we bought secondhand bikes that were $35 each. And then we upgraded and spent $75 each for our next bikes. And by the way, neither the $35 bike nor the $75 bike has been ridden. So just wanted to let you, so maybe I need to spend a lot of money on the bicycle to get it to be ridden. You know why I haven't ridden my bike? Because I too live in a 55 and older community, and we don't have standalone bike trails. We have shared paths with walkers, and I don't feel safe. So we have to go to Hilton Head or we have to go somewhere else to ride them. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, go ahead, continue.
Well, all I was going to say is I have radar that's on the back of my bike that beeps at me and tells me when a car's coming behind me. I've got
your
lights.
Bike.
I have lights on the front and lights on the back with blinking lights that turn on when someone approaches. They start blinking. There's safety features you can get now, Kathe.
Your bike probably costs more than my current car, is what I'm guessing.
Probably. But Becky was the inspiration for that, because I said, I can envision myself not doing that. I'll probably never make it to New Zealand, but it just hit so many notes. Being with other people, trying something I haven't done for 20 years, exercise. Like, I was so hungry last night because I rode for 3.5 hours. That's how long it took to ride the 30 miles, because it was hills and whatever. So,
and I bet you slept.
I just want to say, Becky,
did you sleep like a baby?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. My husband said I hit the pillow and I never moved.
Yeah, that's the best.
Never moved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how much insomnia do people that are older have? Because to your point, in one of the chapters, you talked about sitting, right? We sit so much, TV, reading a book or whatever, and you gave suggestions like get up, get the water for the dog, or, walk around the block. So anyway, I'm super excited because, as an example, my father is going to turn 90 in August. He rides his bike every other day, 35 to 45 miles down in Arizona. It's pretty flat, but in between he swims and he lifts weights, and he is vibrant and young and amazing. And he's almost 90. So it's a good, I'm not there yet. I cannot keep up with him, but I will get there.
No, that's amazing.
Wow.
And as soon as, the earlier, the better, right? And what I love about this is that you're telling these stories. And one of my passions is to change the culture of aging. And there's the way you change the culture is you do story-worthy things, and then you tell people about it. So that's what you just did, Barbara. And thanks for sharing that story. It's amazing. Or you tell other people's story-worthy things, like you just told about your dad. The story I like to often share is meet with a lot of book clubs. And I was at a book club recently, and I was asking, just kind of throughout this question, what's kind of waiting in the wings? What's something that you maybe kind of hidden back in your soul that you've always wanted to do, but haven't done? Or what's kind of ways you do something new in your life? And one woman kind of shyly raised her hand, and she goes, well, I'm in this group of about 7 women, and we made a pact with each other that when we get together every Wednesday, we cannot repeat the same activity. We have to do something new every week, which I thought was a great idea, right? I mean, they're not going to the same coffee shop and all that. They're mixing it up, and they're actually doing active things. So she said, so last week, what we did was we went tubing. So I don't know if you live where it snows. Here in South Dakota, you go to the ski hill and you can ride these inner tubes down this hill. And so that's what these 7 friends did, which I thought was phenomenal. But I said, well, who did you tell about that? And she goes, well, she kind of wrinkled her nose. And I said, so this is what we need to do as older adults. This is what we're going to do to change culture, is you need to post pictures of that on Facebook. Tell your grandchildren, don't be shy about it or embarrassed or anything. So I think that's the point. And that's really, of course, what your podcast does as well. We just need to keep telling those stories so that when our grandchildren look at us and think, hey, I guess being 65 isn't so bad. You can still have a full, fun life.
Well, we talk about that, Kathe and I, because moving into this 55-year-old and older community, my children are in their 40s, of course, and they're raising children. But we're always talking about, we did Mahjong the other night, and, now the bike club's going here, and then the ski club's going here. And even their friends now, because we tell them all the stuff we're doing, say, I want to live in that neighborhood. I said, well, you got to be 55. But I think the point is that there's community, there's activities, and I probably wouldn't have bought this bike. Again, I read your book, but I wouldn't have probably joined the bike club and bought this bike if I didn't have other people to go with me.
For sure.
So, like, for example, yesterday, if I was by myself, not quite like your 70-year-old friend, there was a husband and wife, and my tires were low, and they had a pump, and they pumped it up. I had a much more enjoyable experience going with someone else. And I said, gosh, I hope I didn't hold you up. And they said, no, we enjoyed having someone else along. So I'm learning that the more you put yourself out there, the better the outcome.
Now, I just want to interject for the listener that if you don't live in a 55 and older community, you can still build your own community using programs like Meetup, using a church or a synagogue. I mean, there are ways to build community. You don't have to pick up and move to a 55 and older community like Barbara and I did. And we're on the opposite sides of the country. She's on the West Coast. I'm on the East. But you don't have to do things exactly the way that we do them. The reason we've got Becky on the show is to give you some ideas of things that you could do. So, Becky, thanks again.
So I loved your chapter about let yourself be surprised. it was about transitions. And there was a section there by an author, William Bridges, about transitions. And I highlighted where he talked about the three parts of a transition. One was endings, which for a lot of us was ending our career or our work. And then this neutral zone or a time of fertile emptiness, which that freaks me out just thinking about that. And then the new beginnings. And again, I think that really summarizes what this show's about, is that for people that are approaching retirement, they can be a little worried, they can be a little scared because it's a huge, huge life change, huge transition. And that emptiness is really, really uncomfortable. I love the list. I love the checklist that you had in the book. And so again, I can't more highly recommend your book, but maybe you could just talk about that endings, the emptiness, and, finding that next turn, that next chapter.
I think just we could have a whole hour just on transitions, right? And how you handle those. Mm-hmm. But I think the part that gets uncomfortable is that kind of feeling of emptiness and, adjusting to not having my identity be in my work. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, it kind of just gets back to having that conversation, or just like having other people to ride bike with. You need to have other people that you can retire with, and other people that are going through that transition, so that you can share these stories and not sugarcoat it. I think so often we just think, and I wish that businesses were more intentional about this. I mean, if they've loved having the same employee for 10 or 20 years, why wouldn't you kind of help them transition into this next part of their life? And so I think there's a lot of prep to do in getting ready to retire. Now, sadly, some people, and I think I shared the story of my husband, he kind of had this surprise retirement. So you don't always know. To find people who you can share this experience with, and to realize that you've got choices within it. Hopefully you do anyway, that you can decide, well, maybe I'm done with my main career, but maybe I'd like to work a little bit doing something else, which is fine. And maybe I am not going to go to Arizona or California like everybody else in my neighborhood, but I'm going to just stay here and volunteer or whatever. I mean, there's just so many choices that we just as if think about when somebody is going to graduate from high school, and how we always say, be open to the possibilities, take a gap year. That's actually one of my favorite things to recommend, is that people kind of take a gap year after they quit working. And I'm sure you've talked about this, is that this is probably not the time to make some big major decision, right? Give yourself some time to do some investigation. And then maybe after a year, after that transition time, is when you can make some specific plans.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that you recommended was, thinking about rediscovering an old hobby, right? Something that you used to do when you were a child. Or maybe would you work part-time? Maybe you don't go off the cliff of not working anymore, and maybe you just kind of, do a slow off ramp. And then also we talk a lot on this show about volunteer opportunities, because while it's not a paying job, it gets you out there, it gets you interacting with other people, and just the endorphins, I mean, just thinking about what's going on in the world right now. I know food banks are suffering, and, all kinds of places are going to be in need of help. And that's an easy way to get in without the commitment of a job. And when you're a volunteer, they take you as you are when you can come. And so I just really appreciated the effort that was put into that checklist. And I think you said on there, it should be on everyone's refrigerator.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's a good one. It's a good one. So kids, legacy, children, grandchildren. There was a great chapter called generativity. And what I loved about your book, I don't know if we talked about this yet, but at the end of each chapter, I don't want to call it a Bible study, but it was very Bible study-like, in that it asked some kind of probing questions to get thoughts going. So I'm glad you're talking to book clubs, because it felt like it was a book club book, that, the chapters are short and fairly succinct, but then some of the questions. And I'll just read you the one that you put in there. It said, your turn. As moms, dads, aunts, uncles, or friends, what have you learned from the children in your life? Take time to write a letter or simply a text to those children, thanking them for what they've taught you. And when I read that, I went, okay, I've got an assignment. I've got 4 grandkids. Taking the time to write a handwritten letter, although I'll have to print because they're not teaching them
right?
cursive.
Oh my gosh.
That's true.
That's true.
Or I'll have to type. But maybe talk a little bit about what prompted you to write that. I'm assuming you've got kids and grandkids, so maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah. And I really loved it. And I kind of discovered that concept, I would say, while I was reading through all of this geriatric literature, because I think so often we think, oh, you're kind of obsessed with what have I taught my children and I'm going to be a role model and all that. But I really love kind of flipping that on its head and just putting into your thoughts, what have I learned from my children? You know, for one thing, it shows a gratitude, which we all know is so positive. But it also kind of opens up that intergenerational relationship, which is always helpful and magical, I think. What I am grateful for is that I have been blessed with 4 kids, but I also have lots of nieces and nephews, and I have been involved in different organizations, tennis and some ministries where I get to hang out with younger people. And I think they appreciate being valued by me. And so I think we always have to express that. Sometimes we are seen as, okay, boomer. You know, I mean, come on. I hate that phrase, but that's what it means. You know, it's kind of like they already know how we're going to respond or what we think of something. Well, no, you know, you're going to be open. You're going to want to hear what they have to say. And so I think this idea of generativity, it's a great exercise. And I have to say, I probably haven't specifically written a letter to them, but if I have a chance around the table or whatever, we love to have conversations with our kids. I'll call one of them out and I'll say, I love that I have a daughter-in-law who's in the music business, which is totally foreign to me. And I'll just tell her, I love that I'm learning all about this whole different culture of musicians and hip hop and all this that I normally wouldn't know about. And, you know, and then that just leads to a deeper relationship and trust amongst you and your children.
It's amazing when you think about your life and your legacy, and it's all kind of honed down into, you know, what at the end. And it's really what we share with those kids and what they might share about us with their grandchildren or great-grandchildren. And you think about, well, what is it that I'm doing now that will instill in them who I was or am, what I did, how I lived my life, that they'll be inspired by enough to remember us. And I do think the power of the written word, I mean, you're a writer, you're a storyteller. They may not appreciate it now, but I do think spending time with those kids, writing them a note, writing them a letter, it does take some intentionality, but we're such a quick world now, texting, reels, screens, and to take the time just to sit down for a minute and say, what do you want to say? Whether they'll treasure it or keep it, I don't think matters. I think it's the point that you make is do it. Just go ahead and write them a note and see what happens.
Yeah. And just the other day, I told my son and his wife, they're 30 years old. They write the most amazing cards. So, you know, you save all your cards anyway, but if I run across the birthday card from them or the Mother's Day card or whatever, I actually have one here on my desk. And they are so heartfelt. And I actually was honest with them. I said, you guys are so great at taking time to write these messages. And I learned that from you and I appreciate it so much. I need to be more like you in that respect. And so I think it's so great for kids to hear that, you know, we might have grown up in a time where I feel like my parents must have thought that they weren't supposed to ever like be too boastful about us or be too, you know, too much, too authentic or whatever. But now it's just like we tell people, you know, to your point again, we don't know how many more days we have. So if you have a chance to tell someone, tell them.
That's great advice. Great advice.
Well, my husband, I think you, as a person that works with geriatrics, he's just all of a sudden needed a major back surgery, spinal fusion. Then he got a cold, and then now he needs a hip replaced. So it's been a rough 12 weeks, but it's motivated me to get in shape so I can be a caregiver. And the caregiving is not for the faint of heart. I have nothing but appreciation for the people who care for us, because just this short stint at it, I'm not good at it. I'm not patient. I've tried, but it's like, that's not my skill set, but I'm having to do it. But he was complaining the other day to a friend who's a firefighter. And the friend listened patiently to his older guy woes, and then said something that has really stuck with us. And that was, well, you know, a lot of people don't get as long to live as you have. And every day in my job, I see children, I see young people, I see car accidents, and death is just around the corner for all of us. But because you've lived so long, yes, it is different now, but you're alive. And I was thinking about how you talk about being present in the moment and experiencing the sights, the sounds, the smells, and enjoying your life and realizing that this is like our third act. And maybe you could talk about that third act. What are the first two acts? And then,
Sure.
What does it mean to you?
Yeah. And the third act, I think, typically in my mind, especially because when I wrote this book, I was turning 60. So I kind of see like 60 to 90 or hopefully beyond that, right? And maybe your first act is more like 0 to 30, where it's almost kind of prescribed what you're going to be doing. You're going to go to your school, you're going to get your first job, continue your education, whatever. And then in that middle, kind of crazy, exhausting 3 decades, 30 to 60, where you're maybe raising a family or totally immersed in your career. But then I really think, just because of how the first act and that second act rolled out, that should really inform and get you excited about what this third act can be. And one of the things I like to say, I've always been looking for a great definition of retirement, and I would love to hear from both of you what your definition of retirement is. But my latest one is retirement is the end of repetition. And this is the way kind of my personality, I don't really like to do the same thing twice. I just like to always kind of do things a little bit differently. And so that kind of even pushed me into my retirement, because there was just kind of this drone of the same activity, kind of repetition. I felt like there's so many other things I'm interested in. And so now when I open my calendar and I see such a variety of things every week, and there's not even I don't even have to get up at the same time every day, but I do. So I do see that I love the openness of my calendar, and so this third chapter of life, and maybe that's why I ended up calling it Turning, the Magic and Mystery of More Days. I think there can be so much magic that happens. There can be so much mystery, and certainly sometimes they can be kind of negative things that happen, as you share, Barbara, about what your husband's health status is right now. In all of it, there can be quite a richness and an opportunity to keep learning, an opportunity to meet new people. And so I can understand what your young fireman friend was saying about that. We don't have a prescribed number of days, but I think what we do have is that opportunity to approach them by not looking at ourselves, not looking internally, but actually always looking out to see what the rest of the world needs. So I talk about the third chapter not being so much a time of planning, but maybe leaving yourself open to a little more serendipity, a time when you don't really have to see yourself as your own project, but that really you turn out and you look out to see what the world around you needs. And that's what's going to give a richness to your life.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And that is a great way to end the show. But before we do, if our listeners want to reach out to you, I don't know if you have a website or if it's just through the book, tell our listener how they can contact you.
Absolutely. I do have a website. It's called Becky Blue Writes, all one phrase, beckybluewrites.com. And there is a space there about how to get my book, and also a space there where you can just write me a question or a comment, or if anybody would like to start a book club and have me guest via Zoom or have me come and speak, I would be more than willing to do that.
Well, fantastic. And thanks to both of you for coming on the Rock Your Retirement show. This was great fun. And to the listener, we'll see you next time on the Rock Your Retirement show. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.